Hey y'all, I'm Karen Mayer Cunningham, the special education boss. If you've ever felt confused, overwhelmed, or just plain frustrated at the 504 IEP table, you are in the right place. Every week, I'm breaking down the rules, the rights, and the realities of special education so you can walk into meetings informed, empowered, and ready to make real change. And whether you're a parent, a teacher, an advocate, a school-based member, or somebody who's just trying to do right by a student, this podcast gives you straight talk, real answers, and tools that you can use immediately. I'm not here to play politics. I'm not here to play sides. I'm here to train people who sit at the table and teach you how to follow the law, ask the right questions, and protect the rights of students. So go ahead and hit subscribe, share this with a friend, and you know what? Meet me back here every single week. We're not just talking about change. We're making it. Because when you know better, you do better. And when we get it right for the child, we get it right for everybody.
Hello, welcome you guys. We are in a series, Important Letters from OSEP, Office of Special Education Programs. If we haven't met, I'm Karen Mayer Cunningham, Special Education Boss, training everyone that sits at the 504 IEP table to navigate and negotiate successful student outcomes. If you're not familiar with one of the 13 federal entities that oversee or are part of the educational system in the United States, OSEP, Office of Special Education Programs, you certainly want to make sure that you get on their email list so you can get updated letters. And how does a letter come to be from OSEP? That is because they've heard much rumbling from persons in America whose students are impacted by disability in a public education setting or an entity that receives federal funds. Tonight, we're going to be going over a letter. Now, you've realized they've been writing letters for 46 years for OSEP, so there's a million letters. But this is from December 20th, 2013. Feels like it's 5 minutes ago. It was a decade ago, right? My first child graduated high school that long ago. Oof. And so this is really important. One of the things that you need to know about is the reenactment of IDEA in 2004. Reenactment of IDEA 2004. 4 major things happened in there, I would say. I'm sure more major things. I wasn't at the meeting. They should have called, right? Now, 1, we added ESY. 2, we got ourselves together and got transition in there. 3, I'm going to forget what 3 is. It was important. And then 4, we removed the language that said severe discrepancy model. So how many of you guys have advocated and been frustrated over the ridiculousness of getting a child qualified for an SLD? We can't do that. We have to have this. You need to be facing northwest, wearing purple socks. The wind has to be blowing, right? So here's the good news. Again, in 300.111, the end of child fine statute, it said a student doesn't have to be listed by ineligibility. As long as we know as a committee, said student is in need of special education and or related services. So really, when you're in meetings and you're like, oh, we have to do what the state says, we have to do what the federal government says, the federal government actually gave you liberty. So their intention in 1975 was you already get in there, get to work, and do what's right for the advocate. No, do what's right for the principal. No, do what's right for the PE teacher. No, do what's right for the child. That was the assumption, right? And we found that's not always the way meetings go. So let's look at this letter. I think I really like that his title is Distinguished Professor of Education. I like that. If you're going to be a professor of education, you should be, what would I be? Distinguished Professor of Yakking. I feel like I'm distinguished in the yakking department. So what's happened is this person has written enough letters and there's enough response from the public they want to know about. Okay, so we have the letter, and the letter is because this is an important question that's been addressed by many people, but you can actually yourself, you can write a letter to OSEP. So OSEP is not the police. They're not the law, but they're reminding entities, state educational agencies, what their duties, obligation, and responsibilities are, right? They're just reminding them like this is in the law, okay? So it says, Dear Mr. Delisle, from Myrtle Beach. I just feel like he's friends with Dr. Yao. This letter is in response to your emails to me dated March 8th, 2013 and April 4th, 2013, asking for clarification of IDEA and its implementing regulations as they apply to children who have high cognition and may have specific learning disabilities. In your communication, you referred to these children as twice exceptional or 2E. So in case you don't know what twice exceptional or 2E is, So a student who their cognition is one deviation above the norm is often considered gifted. So if the norm is 100 and their IQ is 115, that's in the 85th percentile or higher. Those students are often categorized or meet eligibility for gifted. 2E would mean they're two deviations from the norm, right? Their IQ is going to be 130. And so while we're very enamored with athleticism, talent, money, IQ, it's not always a benefit for a student that has a high IQ. So he's talking about kiddos that have a high cognition and could they have SLDs. So the first thing he says is the IDA does not specifically address twice exceptional or 2E students. It remains the department's positions that students who have high cognition, have disabilities, and require special education related services are protected under the IDEA. So let's just talk about that for a second. All of you have been in a meeting where we're not going to test. She's really smart. Okay. So this letter, we're going to use this letter for a lot of things, but there's so many components that you could use it, right? So the opening line says that students who have high cognition, have disabilities, and require special education. So they're not exclusive of each other, right? We're looking for a child that has an educational needs. It's a really good opening line. Are protected under IDEA and its implementation. See letter to anonymous dated January 13th, 2010. It's very hard to find that letter, but just FYI, I don't know why. When you Google, it's hard to find. Anyway, that is under 34 CFR 300.8. A child must meet a two-pronged test to be considered eligible for a disability. One, have a specific impairment, which is a way of saying you have a disability. And two, because of that impairment, need special education and related services. Or I would say they need an IEP goal. They have a deficit that I need to give them instruction above the general ed teacher. You have a disability. So what skill or strategy should I teach you? I've heard me say it 100 times. We have one job in special education to teach a child strategies to self-manage their disability. Okay. With regard to your first question, under CFR 300.307, a state must adopt, consistent with 34 CFR, criteria for determining whether a child has an SLD as defined by 34 CFR 300.8. Now, everybody here that's in a school from Florida to Oregon, we've all been told how different it is in your state for SLDs. They like to tell me we are an RTI state. That is the goofiest thing. That's one of the goofiest things I've ever heard. No, like that's like on the placard when you just drive over. We're an RTI state. Every state uses RTI. So I want you to be clear when you're in a meeting or you're repeating what your principal told you, or you're repeating what your curriculum instructor told you. If you don't sound ridiculous, every state that has teachers has the option to use RTI. Okay. The criteria adopted by the state. One, must not require the use of a severe discrepancy between intellectual ability and achievement for determining whether a child has an SLD. Must not. So let's just stop right there. Anybody that's ever advocated in Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Florida, it will tell you have to be 22.5. It's just goofy points, goofiness, right? Number two, must permit the use of a process based on the student's response to scientific research-based intervention. So that means we can, how did Katarina respond to RTI? We can use that, right? Number three, and may permit the use of an alternative research-based procedures for determining whether a child has an SLD. Therefore, a state's criteria under 34 303.307 may permit, but must not require. May permit, but must not require. That is a phrase that I want you to understand. Just because the statute in Wyoming says this, it's something that they can permit. It's not a requirement. So be very clear when somebody's reading you their statute, that you are not sitting in front of somebody UPL, an unlawful practice of law, right? So a statute is what permits. It does not include what's not allowed. Okay, so they're not bound by that. Okay, but it's not a requirement. It's a permit. A statute is a permit, but not a requirement. The use of a severe discrepancy between intellectual disability and achievement for determining whether a child has an SLD. SLD is my jam. I think everybody has an SLD. I'm wrong. But I think that it's one of the most under-identified disabilities there is. And every time I have a kiddo that meets eligibility for SLD, their cognitive profile and their achievement profile looks different because you should have a professional, whether it's an LSSP, an LPC, a social worker, a diagnostician, that can describe those tests, describe how the student responded to those tests, and then give other factors that may not show up in black and white print. It's not that streamlined. It's not, oh, you got an 87 here and got a 64 here. That's for sure this, right? So please make sure that when you're in those meetings, that the person that administered the test and the person describing the test knows what they're talking about. Very quickly and very easily to determine when that person doesn't know. Like I'll say, so Cindy, did you find it unusual that he got this in auditory processing and then he was 2-3 deviations away from fluid reasoning? The numbers are the numbers. Okay, that's the wrong response. When I ask you, do you think that's an outlier? Those are the numbers. There's a young lady in a school district in this city, and it doesn't matter what you ask her, and she's the lead diagnostician for the district. Those are the numbers. I put them in there on the paper. I know you put them on the paper, but did you find that those are the numbers? That's what he got. All right, this has been enjoyable. You should be able to have a conversation about how did we come to those numbers. Those evaluators should be able to answer those questions. I just had an evaluation done in a place in Texas. There's so many places. And the baby was 7. And they did WJ4 and achievement in one day. That is 8 wrong. And she said, we got through it quickly. Oh, it's even more wrong. Ask them, what is the model? I would say, what is the model that you're using to determine or to identify an SLD or to eliminate an SLD? You guys have heard me say that 100 times. What is the model that you're using to determine an SLD? And she'll tell you. And there's nothing wrong with her telling you that, right? The only thing that's wrong with it, if she's solely bound by it, if that's the only way to get there, is that the only way that I can get there? If you hear this phrase, the numbers are the numbers, okay? That's not how special ed works. If that's how special ed worked, they would just email you and you could look at or lump it and here's a copy of your IEP. The numbers are not the numbers. We're working on a human. There's a gazillion factors and most of the factors we'll never know because they're humans. They're little tiny humans, okay? I have often used this paragraph and I said, while you're permitted to use that, you're certainly not excluding the other options. You're not excluding the other options from being a conversation, are you? And then that's when it starts. No school district has a policy about SLDs. No school board made a policy about determining special education criteria. It's just a lie. And it's not even a good one. The state of Texas TEA certainly has guidance around SLDs, very large guidance, which again gives the liberty back to the district because there's so many factors in there. So when somebody tells you our school district has this about an eligibility, their pants are on fire and it's a terrible odor. Okay. So I would say, could you please provide me a copy of that board policy? Because when they say our school district, what they just told you was a board policy. Of all the things school board members do, they do not go back there and go, hey, how do you think you find an SLD? So a school board policy has been what? Been presented to the school board. There was open discussion. There was talk. They went back, had their Chick-fil-A sandwiches. They voted and they funded it. Like when people say there's a law in Katie ISD that we can't email Karen. There is? Isn't it a law? Yep, it's the law. Wow. So when somebody says that, the first thing I do, which is why I do all my meetings by Zoom, is great. So the only people that can have input in IEP meeting are people that are in the IEP meeting. Otherwise, that would be called predetermination. If somebody outside of an IEP meeting is making a decision, then the parents didn't get to have a discussion with them. So you've denied the parent meaningful participation in the IEP process because it was made by somebody who sits outside of the meeting. I've been in meetings where they've stopped and called somebody. And I said, no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. That person has not been here for the last hour. So that is inappropriate participation in an IEP meeting. But it's not true. None of it's true. It's just not true. Okay. Usually language is very general. It's not specific. It doesn't say you have to have 22.5. Now, when you get to Missouri or Indiana or Illinois, they do have a lot of stuff written in the statute. But you have to remember, I could pull it off the shelf if I could reach over there. The Texas statutes are 389 pages long. I probably am the only person that's printed those out because I think we all know Karen loves a printout, right? 380 something pages long. So it's like taking a phrase out of a book. What are you missing? Context, right? You're missing how you got to that. I will hear Texas has a very large dyslexia handbook, and I'll hear somebody take one phrase out of there. Screen share that. And they can't because they heard it at a seminar. And so the reason that the Texas Administration Code is 389 pages long is it is, right? So I'm certainly happy to have a conversation about what that statute, code, or regulation says. Please screen share that. We are not going to do that. Wow, that's going to be a problem. Since all the school-based members know about it, but you won't let the parent know about it. Okay? I don't know why there is so much pushback for SLDs. I do know why. Because you're going to have to provide that for the entirety of he's in school, right? If he has an SLD in 3rd grade, guess what? He's probably going to have an SLD in 10th grade, right? Mom can't go to the doctor and pick up his prescription to not have an SLD, correct? So the next paragraph says, regarding your second question, the regulations do not require or prohibit. Do not require or prohibit. Do not require or prohibit. Okay? A safe use of cut scores. And you guys ever heard about cut scores? Ugh. Ugh. I always think that's how people get in trouble in the parking lot because of the cut scores. That's when we have after the football game, I'll meet you in the parking lot. When determining if there's a severe discrepancy between intellectual ability achievement for determining whether a child has an SLD. If you go back and Google severe discrepancy model argument, it probably ruined the first 20 years of educating all handicapped children. If there was a severe discrepancy model, you had to have some crazy cavern. And the fact that IDEA took it out means there was a problem. The fact that they took out that language was because it caused more problems than it was to provide guidance. It means that there should be a discrepancy, right? They're not all the same. That's why it's called the specific learning disability. It's an unexpected area. It's not expected, right? And I think probably when they put severe discrepancy, it was to give somebody a visual sense of that there's an outlier. Instead, it ended up causing more problems. Right? So the regulations do not require or prohibit the state use of cut scores when determining if there's a severe discrepancy between intellectual disability and achievement for determining whether a child has an SLD. Rather, regulations allow a state flexibility. What's that word? Flexibility. Isn't that what you guys experience at meetings? Flexibility. I just go to a meeting and I'm like, these people are they're like yoga instructors. So flexible. Flexibility in establishing its criteria for determining whether a child has an SLD. The regulation allows a state flexibility. So why can't we have conversations around that flexibility? As long as that criteria meets the requirement back under 34 CF or 300.307. So again, it all goes back to the federal code. No school, county, city can reduce the benefit of IDA by constricture, right? By making it harder to meet eligibility. That was never the intention that you're going to make it harder. It is important to note that in determining whether a child has a disability, whether an SLD or any other type of disability, the IDA requires the use of a variety of assessment tools and strategies. Okay, he didn't have a severe discrepancy model. What is the variety of assessment or tools that you use? Again, where else does that show up? In a prior written notice. This is what we did. And that's how he showed up today. Okay, we're not really talking about an SLD because of today, because Stephanie gave him an assessment. We're talking about because he struggles in reading, writing, oral expression, listening comprehension for years after receiving direct instruction from a general ed teacher. That's why we're having this conversation, not because of one test. Does that make sense? But the more you talk it out, the more it makes sense. Sometimes you're in a meeting where people are allergic to sense. They, and especially if it's common sense. We don't do that in Florida. Okay. Okay. All right. So I would ask them, IDEA requires, and again, I would also have them attach this letter to the deliberations. IDEA requires, it's a requirement that we use a variety of assessment tools and strategies to gather relevant functional, developmental, and academic information. What's that? A class about the child. It also prohibits the use of any single measure or assessment as a sole criteria. Boom, chicka, boom. It prohibits the use of one criterion because that one, Stephanie could have done it exactly right that day, followed the protocol, and it could have been totally wrong. It just wasn't a good day for Kelly. And that's why. And for determining an appropriate educational program for the child. Therefore, I love it. Therefore, and make that sound with your mouth. Therefore, mom's your daddy, right? Therefore, inconsistent with with IDEA for a child, regardless of whether the child is gifted, to be found ineligible for special education related services in our SLD category solely because the child scored a particular cut score established by state policy. Boom. Further, under 300.309, the group described may determine that a child has an SLD if the child does not achieve adequately for the child's age or meet grade approved level standards. Now, I've been doing this long enough that I can just rattle this letter off. This letter, you need to keep a copy of it with some Chick-fil-A sauce in your purse at all times. This is gold. This is them giving you legal guidance under the purpose of IDEA. So when I'm in a meeting and a state, a city, or a county is arguing with IDEA, then this will go with my federal complaint to the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. OCR is solely about federal requirements, okay? The child does not achieve adequately for the child's age or meet state-approved grade level standards. When provided with learning expectations and instructional appropriate for the child's age or state-approved grade level standards in one or more of the following areas: oral expression, listening comprehension, written expression, basic reading skills, reading fluency, reading comprehension, mathematics, calculation, or math problem solving. Those are the 9 areas when you include dyslexia. So we need to know if there is a deficit in this area, if they need specially designed instruction. In the analysis of comments and changes in the 2006 final regulations implementation Part B, the department, in responding to public comments, recognized that there will be some students who are gifted but also need special education and related services. Discrepancy models are not essential for identifying children with SLDs who are gifted. However, the regulation clearly allows discrepancies in achievement domains of typical children with SLDs who are gifted to be used to identify children with SLD. In responding to public comments, specifically addressing students who are gifted and who have difficulties reading fluency, the department stated as follows: no assessment in isolation is sufficient to indicate that a child with an SLD and has an SLD, including reading fluency in the list of areas to be considered when determining whether a child has an SLD, makes it more likely that a child who is gifted has an SLD that would be identified. Why is that? A child that's gifted is going to do good on standardized tests. They love a standardized test because it's an isolation, right? They are going to perform well. Talk about skewing the data. You give a gifted child a standardized test, dang it, they're going to crush it. It's controlled. It's for one moment in time. Okay? These are important letters. I want you to start building these letters. So as it relates to SLDs, period, and as it relates to kiddos who are gifted and have good grades. So the misnomer that you could have good grades, you can be in advanced classes and not have a specific learning disability is kiboshed by this letter. Okay? I want you to learn these letters. I want you to read these letters, and I want you to be able to articulate its components without pulling it up. So I would say, in a meeting, I'm sure that you're familiar with the OSEP letter from December 20th, 2013. I'm sure you're familiar with that, correct? Yeah. And so I just wanted to, Indy, are you taking notes? Great. If you could just add this to the deliberations, because you know what? I talk really fast, and that may not have gotten in the deliberations. I want that to be part of my students' cumulative folder. Whether or not the district chooses to read it, apply that knowledge is up to them. So when I go into meetings, do I have a lot of knowledge from doing this for almost 30 years? Yes, because I've done it for almost 30 years. But I am still in meetings. You can ask any of the people here that they're my client. I'm adding this to the meeting, whether you like it or not, right? So that when it gets in front of a hearing officer, when it gets in front of a state investigator, when a mediator might see it, when a federal investigator sees it, they'll have to respond to not, you didn't agree with Karen, you didn't agree with the federal guidance. Federal guidance overrides Karen every time. Okay. These are gold. These letters are gold, right? There are, I don't know how many of them there are. You can go to ed.gov and print them all out. They didn't ever rescind. They didn't just take any back and go kidding about what happened in 1992. They all build on each other.
I hit subscribe, share this with a friend, and you know what? Meet me back here every single week. We're not just talking about change, we're making it. Because when you know better, you do better. And when we get it right for the child, we get it right for everybody.